is Jessica Mikels. I'm an environmental sociologist, and I was brought on as adjunct faculty for the MESH program. In particular, I teach the environmental justice course, which is right down my alley in terms of environmental sociology and kind of application to kind of addressing the wrongs that we're dealing with in the environment. My favorite book is Richard Flanagan's Gould's Book of Fish. And it's been my favorite book for like over 20 years at this point, I think. I can tell you just briefly. It takes place in Australia. He's an Australian author, when Australia was a penal colony. And so the main narrator is a prisoner of the colony, but the reason he has access to ink is that his warden is really interested in Linnaean classification. And so he's helping to classify and write up all of the aquatic creatures around the island where he is. And so that's why he has that access. But it's kind of, so it's his story of doing that work, but also, I don't know, there's a lot of just kind of like about being human in it. So anyway, it's a really, really good book. So in addition to my horse, I have a lot of animals. So I have 3 goats, 2 dogs, 4 cats, a bunny, and a salamander that is now like 15. So yeah, so the salamander we got when my oldest kid was like 2, and they're now 17, and my youngest kid wasn't even born yet. So yeah, Squirmy he keeps on kicking. Oh, okay. So how did I get where I am? So I started my kind of graduate training in anthropology, and I did a lot of work in history of science as well as anthropology, but then I also had a chance to go to Suriname to do some primatology fieldwork, and that was kind of the direction I thought I was heading, was to do primatology fieldwork. And so I started then thinking that I wanted to shift my focus to kind of the human side of environmental issues, because primatology is super fun. I still have a passion for it, but it kind of didn't matter what the monkeys were doing if the forest was gone. So I ended up applying for and getting into a program at Notre Dame, which at the time was funded by the NSF, and it's called an IGERT, which is an interdisciplinary graduate training program. And I'd spent 2 years in ecology doing landscape genetics, and then I switched over to sociology, where I did environmental sociology of children for my dissertation work. So I had a lot of different trainings, but with kind of this focus on moving towards how humans interact with the natural world and how we can kind of impact that for better. So I finished my dissertation almost 11 years now ago. And then I did consulting and then more recently, I was just hired by Notre Dame for the Center for Broader Impacts, and I'm an evaluation specialist there. So in my time consulting, I worked a whole lot with kind of state level and national level organizations on evaluating programs and interventions. That's kind of the journey, I guess, to this point. Favorite project that I've ever worked on was I was part of a team working on the impacts of sea level rise on coastal wildlife refuges, and this was out in South Carolina in particular. And it's odd coming into environmental stuff as a social scientist, because I think it's really, really needed, but it's not as prioritized. So it was nice to be part of a team that was really, truly interdisciplinary, and where there was kind of mutual respect from the ecologist to the social and back and forth. Just because I think that a lot of times on these types of projects, while there's kind of some lip service played to the social side. So in that project, it's such a difficult problem. The Atlantic is rising quite quickly, quicker than the Pacific because it's so warm. And so these coastal wildlife refuges are tasked with protecting land primarily for migratory birds. That's what they were set up for, was the protection of migratory birds, but they're going underwater. And so the question is, how can they kind of move inland? But then you're somewhere like South Carolina, where we were, outside of Charleston, where there's all of this development happening. And then you have these other like historic ties to the land. The Gullah-Geechee are there, which are former slave populations that have these kind of cultural ties to, say, particularly the saltgrass that they use for basket weaving. And so there's really important resources for kind of the continuation of their culture. And you have these places going underwater and butting up against the built environment, which then puts the built environment at a lot more risk from things like hurricanes and flooding. Charleston floods like every high tide at this point. So there's a real need to kind of think across these different institutions and layers and not only just structures but also kind of cultural things. As well as valuing the ecological services that are being provided. So it was a really complicated project, but it was really nice to be part of a team that was, trying to grapple with this on like this kind of, a localized scale, but these kind of really large global processes. In terms of advice that I would give to incoming mesh students, I think, reaching out to the faculty and getting involved with them in conversations. I like to leave a lot of feedback because I don't get to meet them and I wish that I did. And so either engaging through those kind of, textual ways or coming to office hours or reaching out to set up other appointments, I think is really important because it gives, it provides so much more depth to understanding the students' responses when you've been able to meet them and, understand their own personal life and you don't have to know everything personally, but know more about where they're coming from and why they're, focusing on the types of projects that they're focusing on. I think that provides the faculty with a lot, but I also hope that it's enriching to the students to get that kind of closer tie with the faculty. And with MESH in particular, I mean, these are a lot of professional people coming back to do this and have a lot of different motivations for why they're doing it. And so they bring this really rich lived experience with them, which I think, particularly, I don't know enough about all the other classes, but particularly in the environmental justice class is really great to see that kind of, that critical thinking across like not only the literature, but also your own lived experience. I think it's really helpful. And this was fun to talk about, and I'm looking forward to continuing to learn more about MESH and learn more about the students.